In the previous video, Ji-wook and his office staff had a hasty dinner in order to get some information from Hyun-soo, an ex-client who they suspect may be responsible for some crimes. Yoo-young was also there to tell the office group that she will be investigating the case of Bang-hee's ex-boyfriend. I'm Nina, and in today's recap we'll be watching Suspicious Partner. Once everyone is at the table, Ji-wook asks Hyun-soo questions about whether he knew Chan-ho, who has become the main suspect in the chef's case, among other things. In all of them, the man remains normal, there doesn't seem to be any agitation. Then the lawyer remembers that the only time Hyun-soo seems to have flared up was when he crumpled up the photos of the man he assaulted in his penultimate arrest. So Ji-wook tells prosecutor Yoo-young that she should investigate whether Chan-ho has been charged with violence against women. The scene cuts and we go to the last time Chan-ho appeared. As soon as the man came out of the water, Hyun-soo found him. Now back to the present, Eun-hyuk receives a call from a client asking him to come to her house. There, the lawyer discovers that his client has allegedly taken her husband's life, but because she can't bear to hide the truth from Eun-hyuk, she asks for complete secrecy about what she's going to tell him next. It wasn't the woman who did this to the man, but she suspects it might have been his son, considering the father's history with the boy, so to protect him, she wants to take the blame for the crime. The next day, Ji-wook talks to Eun-ho about the times Hyun-soo seems to have gotten out of control and the manager is put in charge of going after the woman whose former client had done that assault on the man that led to his arrest in order to defend her. Meanwhile, Eun-hyuk has complied with his client's request to protect her son, so, breaking the law that lawyers must not make false statements, the woman pleads guilty in the case, but will still have court hearings. Later, the lawyer presents the case to his colleagues, but it won't be so easy to keep his client's secret, as Ji-wook has taken an interest and says he'll get involved with Bang-hee to help Eun-hyuk. The lawyer even tries to make his client think again before the court hearings begin, but she is determined to continue with her statement. She doesn't want people to think that it might have been her son. And in a conversation with Bang-hee, Ji-wook reveals that he wants to help Eun-hyuk in this case, because he thinks he's acting too strange and something is bothering him. The protagonist comments to the lawyer that she thinks her client's son could be a suspect in the crime and that he's downstairs at the moment, being interrogated by Eun-hyuk. Ji-wook then goes to meet them and starts asking questions that make the boy feel coerced. Seeing that his friend has already realized what's going on, Eun-hyuk dismisses his client's son and talks to Ji-wook. In the end, the man tells him the truth, but says that he will prioritize the woman's request, because that's what's right for Eun-hyuk. After the first court hearing, the protagonist noticed the mother's behavior towards her son and decided to do her part and investigate. She found out that the boy wasn't the perpetrator, because when he left the house that day, he did have a fight with his father, but the man was still fine when the boy left the house. Bang-hee thought of various possibilities as to why the man had been found like that and, when she investigated his medical history, she discovered a medication he was taking. This could have led to a cerebral hemorrhage due to a ruptured aneurysm. Ji-wook is very proud of the growth the protagonist is making in the field and tells her so. When a second autopsy is requested, prosecutor Yoo-young confirms to the lawyers that what Bang-hee thought was correct, that this was indeed the cause of his death, so their client will only be tried for making those stab wounds to the man's body. The protagonist waits for her colleagues outside the room and Ji-hae ends up talking to her. The woman wants to know when Bang-hee and Ji-wook's relationship began, but as the protagonist doesn't answer, Ji-hae asks if it wasn't at the hotel, the day she caught Hee-jun cheating on her. At that moment, Bang-hee realizes that her boyfriend's lover was her and the two start to fight, because Ji-hae bothered her until they finished their course, as if it was the protagonist who had cheated, not the man. To celebrate his victory, Bang-hee goes to visit his mother and Ji-wook does the same. At this point we discover that the lady who owns the restaurant and is Bang-hee's mother's boss is not the lawyer's biological mother, as unfortunately his mother has passed away and we see him in the cemetery talking to her. Later, Hyun-soo called Ji-wook and asked to meet him. In an establishment, Hyun-soo says that he's heard that they're still investigating his past, so Ji-wook replies that it's a habit he has from when he was a prosecutor, but that from now on he'll stop and leave him alone. When he gets home, Ji-wook decides to talk about something very private to him with his beloved, about his family. The man tells her that he has two mothers. His mother, who is alive, was his biological mother's best friend. When Ji-wook was little, a fire broke out in his house and the boy's father was the first to lose his life, while his mother spent a few days struggling to survive in hospital, but eventually passed away. So it was his mother's best friend and her husband who raised him, treated him well and gave him the best things, which makes Ji-wook think he has two mothers and two fathers. And we viewers already knew that Young-hee was a father figure to the lawyer, but it wasn't until that moment that I connected the dots and realized that it was the man and his wife who raised the boy. Returning to the couple's conversation, the protagonist says that it's similar with her, as she has two fathers, but she'll talk about that another day. Later, when Ji-wook is asleep, he dreams about the day his house caught fire and he remembers the face of the man who was there, as well as his parents. Then we see the protagonist with her diary, in which there is a photo of her with her mother and father, and if you look, Bang-hee's father's face is very similar to the one Ji-wook saw in his dream. The next day, Ji-wook asks Eun-ho to stop investigating Hyun-soo for a moment, because the man has found out what they're doing and since we already know he's dangerous, the lawyer doesn't want to put the people he cares about at risk. Later, Ji-wook goes with Young-hee and Bak-ja to visit his parents at the cemetery, while Bang-hee and his mother are also there, as his father was also buried on the same day, but the families never cross paths. In the next scene we see the case of a shaman, a person who has visions of what might happen in the future. This man was in an establishment when another man entered. He had a vision that this person was going to use a knife against a woman in the place, so he decided to stop him. However, the fight ended up destroying some things in the establishment and in the end the two were charged with bodily injury, damage to property and public disorder. Ji-wook's office takes the shaman on as a client and discovers that the man was already on parole for the same reason. No matter how many times Young-ha proves to them that he has this gift and isn't lying, Ji-wook can't believe him. Eun-ho went looking for evidence to prove what the client had said and there was indeed a knife that the person could use against an employee on the premises, which was inside his jacket, which helps Young-ha prove that he is telling the truth. Putting up a defense for him, however, will be a bit difficult. On one of the occasions when Young-ha is in the office, he predicts that two people from the place could possibly die soon, which freaks everyone out, except Ji-wook, who still doesn't believe the man. In the next scene we see Bang-hee in a park watching Ji-wook from afar. Eun-hyuk told him that he would be there, just like every year. The man always does this on the anniversary of his father's death, because the day before the tragedy happened, the couple had promised to take the boy on a picnic, so Ji-wook does it alone every year. Eun-hyuk and Young-hee don't accompany him because they think he likes to be alone at this time, but the protagonist decides to go because she is also going through the same thing, having lost her father and knows how lonely this moment is. Bang-hee ends up keeping the man company and she tells him a story about how her father was going to teach her to ride a bicycle, but ended up losing his life, so Ji-wook decides to do it for her. In the end, the man discovers that the protagonist had already learned, because while he thought he was teaching her, the two of them spotted that abusive man on the subway from the first episodes and he was taking pictures of women in the park. Bang-hee decided to go after him and hand him over to the police. She had already let him get away with it once, when she promised she wouldn't do it again, but now she wasn't going to do the same and called the authorities. Before being handcuffed, the man commented on some crimes having taken place on the roof of the building facing the one she used to live in, and after witnessing one, he decided to move out. He learns about Bang-hee's suspicion in Hee-jun's case and says that she must have seen something to have ended up in that situation. After the man is taken away, Ji-wook and the protagonist go to the roof of the neighboring building to see if they can find anything, and there are indeed some bodies there. The next day, Bang-hee is on her way to meet Ji-wook at an establishment when she bumps into Hyun-soo and some things fall out of his hand. When the man goes to help her, she ends up listening to the melody coming out of his headphones and realizes that it's the same one that the person responsible was singing for the crime she was suspected of, on his day and on the way out of court. Of course, from that moment on things start to change, because what was suspected is now almost 100% confirmed and a fear takes over the protagonist's body. Bong-hee even tries to call the man who put up the banner for her and had contact with the real perpetrator, but Hyun-soo rushes off and threatens him, telling him to indicate that it would be Chan-ho instead, and if the protagonist insists on questioning him, to ignore her, otherwise her children will suffer the consequences. In the end, the protagonist decides to hide her discovery from Ji-wook, but tells Eun-hyuk, who helps her calm down. In the evening, she writes down the 3 clues that could confirm that Hyun-soo is the perpetrator of the crimes: the man from the banner store, the perverted man who witnessed something, and the music she heard coming out of Hyun-soo's headphones. Wanting to solve this mystery quickly, Bong-hee decides to go to the owner of the banner store, but as soon as he leaves the house, he bumps into Hyun-soo at the gate. The man is already acting strangely, asking her why she's so scared to see him, and slowly starts to approach, but Eun-hyuk shows up just then and invites her inside. As it's too late, the man may have just saved the protagonist from a tragedy. The next day, the hearing of the shaman's case arrives and Ji-wook only manages to get him to pay a fine for the damage he caused to the establishment. However, when the two of them say goodbye and each go their separate ways, the lawyer's belief about the shaman's visions changes, because 2 people who were there that day were actually in danger of dying, one of them being Mr. Young-ha, who has just been hit by a car. The man is in a serious condition in hospital and Ji-wook accompanies him until his girlfriend, who was leaving the airport, arrives at the scene. Young-ha has another vision and tells the lawyer not to cry too much because everything will be fine. The shaman's girlfriend soon arrives, and as soon as they have a few words, the man can no longer resist and passes away. After Ji-wook leaves the hospital, he rushes to find the protagonist and declares himself to her once again. The man is overcome with fear of losing her and doesn't want to waste any more time. In the next scene we see the 2 of them already at home. The lawyer ends up telling Bong-hee the things he knows about Hyun-soo and says that it's better for the 2 of them to go through this situation together than apart, but it's up to her to decide. Ji-wook promises that he will catch him and that the woman doesn't have to blame herself for insisting that they defend him in court, as it's an accident that can happen in this profession. Later, when the protagonist is in her room, she receives a call from a friend of hers asking Bong-hee to go to the police station, because the woman's ex-boyfriend didn't accept their breakup and chased her with a knife. The man even managed to hit her a few times, but thanks to a student, she managed to survive, because the man got scared and ran off. Ji-wook goes with the protagonist to the scene and they have 48 hours to find the murder weapon or a witness so that the man can stay in prison longer. The next day, the protagonist makes a choice and says she won't waste any more time. She decides to reciprocate Ji-wook's feelings. At the meeting, Bong-hee and Young-hee argue as usual, but as soon as it's over, Ji-wook pulls her into a corner and explains that that couple raised him as their son. Young-hee is part of him and is like his father, so it would be good if the protagonist took it easy on him. At that moment, the woman realizes that they're screwed, because all this time they've been working together, she's been picking on him and now it's going to be difficult to reverse the image she's created with him. Later, Eun-ho managed to find out who those other 2 men in the picture with Chan-ho were, even though she was overruling Ji-wook's orders. Eun-ho couldn't find the 2 men in Chan-ho's school yearbook, because they each graduated separately. They weren't in the same class, but they studied in the same place. Then Ji-wook receives a call from prosecutor Yu-young, who tells him that they have identified the identity of one of the bodies found on the roof and that he is one of the men in the photo that Eun-ho is investigating. So the group holds a meeting to gather the facts and they realize that everything really is connected, but there are a few problems. Firstly, that they don't have any concrete evidence to declare Hyun-soo guilty, and secondly that they are investigating this case as civilians, since they aren't participating in it as lawyers, meaning they can't get involved or delve deeper into the investigations. In the next scene, we see that Eun-hyuk has gone to meet prosecutor Yu-young and told her what everyone in the office is suspecting, and as she is the only one who has the power to investigate and arrest him, they bring her up to speed. Meanwhile, The protagonist and Ji-wook are looking for the murder weapon so that the man can stay in prison longer, but the two of them have searched all the places he's been and found nothing. In the evening, Eun-ho receives the address of the man with the dyed hair in the photo and decides to go to his house to ask him some questions, but before she goes, Eun-ho leaves a message for Ji-wook. Then the lawyer who was accompanying Bang-hee to her friend's work says that he's going to meet Eun-ho to prevent anything from happening to him, but asks his friend to keep in touch, because as they haven't found any evidence against her friend's ex-boyfriend, he'll be released today. After the clock has run out, Eun-hyuk manages to find the witness and she asks if the woman was all right after the stabbing. Then the lawyer asks her if she saw where the man hid the object and the girl replies that it was inside his broken arm cast, which is why no one found the weapon. Eun-hyuk then calls the police station to tell them about the witness and where the knife is, at which point he learns that the man has already been released, so he decides to warn Ji-wook as he drives towards the woman's house. Meanwhile, the man has actually gone after the woman and thanks to Bang-hee, the two are fine. We know that our protagonist knows martial arts very well and so she manages to save herself and her friend. The protagonist only got a small cut on her arm, but when Ji-wook arrived at the scene, he was startled because there were a lot of people around, along with an ambulance and police officers. Bang-hee asks him if everything is alright with Eun-ho, but the lawyer didn't even meet him, as he went straight to where she was when he heard that the man had been released, so the protagonist asks him to go to Eun-ho, as Eun-hyuk is already arriving to help them anyway. And Ji-wook follows what his beloved said. Now we see Eun-ho, the man who ended up entering the apartment of the man in the photo, because the door was only leaning against it. At the scene, Eun-ho found him on the floor, already lifeless, and unfortunately the perpetrator was still there. The lawyer also knows how to fight very well, but due to his age, it's difficult against a young man and in the end Eun-ho ends up wounded. When Ji-wook arrives at the scene, his colleague is already unconscious and has lost a lot of blood. Of course, Ji-wook despairs, as he doesn't want to lose another person he loves, especially as he doesn't have many around him. What did you think of these episodes? I hope you enjoyed this summary. Leave your suggestions in the comments and subscribe. If you liked the video, like it and share it to help me. Until next time.